thank you everyone for coming. If you don't know me, I'm Ted Eckers. I'm the president of the Historical Society. And we have a great event tonight. I wanted to quickly start off with some thank yous. I wanted to thank Kathy Johnson and Joanna McPeak, who are on the programming committee with the Historical Society, and they've been very helpful with this event. John McHugh at ParkTV, and then I wanted to thank our panelists, Mayor Jacobs, Brad Bakken, Robb Bader, Carl Robertson, Greg Hunt, and I'm going to ask Mayor if you will introduce them a little bit more formally when we get started with that. We do have two events coming up. Kathy Johnson, who's an archivist, will be hosting this first event in November 14th. It'll be a fun workshop in time for Thanksgiving. If you're interested in sharing some family history, she's going to share creative ideas for how to share that. It might be quilts or marriage certificates or photos. So you can come to that workshop on the 14th at our office. And then December 5th, we're trying something new at the depot. We're going to be doing a lighting ceremony. We're going to light the depot for the holidays, just to kind of celebrate it, add a little something to that neighborhood. So we hope you'll come out, join us for hot cocoa and for a brief lighting ceremony. And on November 12th is Minnesota Give to the Max Day. We need your support. We would love that. If you're not aware of it, it's a statewide giving day for nonprofits. So we will be active on there. Look for us and include us in your year-end giving. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Jacobs. He's going to come up here and take over.
Okay, let me first introduce our panel here. Way down there at the end is Brad Bakken, who is the president of Citizens Independent Bank, who's been here. Your bank has been here since the 1960s, hasn't it?
1950. We are celebrating our 65th year, so we did start in 1950. And you do know the Dairy Queen building, which right now is the Grill and Chill.
Right.
That is our original bank building. It's been modified a few times since then. I think our safe might still be in there. They never quite figured out, Perkins or whoever couldn't quite figure out how to get it out of there, so they used to put pies in it and things like that when they were in there. But I don't know if you have a picture or if we can get you a picture, but we have a picture of that building because we still claim the first suburban drive-through
Bank.
That it was just a hole in the wall and had a canopy over it, and you just drove up and we just slid open the window and handed the money out, or you handed it in, and that. So we claim that as our the first suburban drive-through because we've never had anybody claim otherwise.
There we go. Well, in that case, you have the ability to do that.
And we also invented 24-hour banking, which in 1950 meant we had a drop box, a hole in the wall where you open it up and dropped your deposit in overnight. So
very cool. See,
I have not worked there since 1950. I've been there only 33 years, 1982. So we've moved twice since then, across where the Park Nicollet building is now, and then down to our building, our current building down on Beltline.
On Beltline Boulevard across from the rec center. And next to him is Robb Bader, who is the Vice President of Acquisitions and Development for Bader Development. They have done quite a great job with developments over on France Avenue and Excelsior Boulevard, and Robb will be asking a little bit more about that. It was on the old Al's Liquor site. I do need you to confirm one thing, though. By the way, I understand that when the wind and the humidity is right, that you still can smell the cigarette smoke from the sidewalk at Al's. Can you?
Slightly been overtaken by the Heggie's Pizza stench, I believe that was in there as well.
I spent many happy and wasted hours in Al's, and so, but they've done a wonderful job developing, that corner. And when I talk to little kids, I talk about how development patterns have changed, and we'll talk about this because obviously we're a fully developed suburb. And when I show them pictures of St. Louis Park in the 1950s, what you see is row and row and row of single-family houses. So you might have 20 to 24 families on a block, whereas now, because of the cost of real estate and the fact that we've been fully developed now for that many decades, you just about can't do that anymore. There are still a few single-family home developments being done, but primarily they look like yours. I mean, they have a commercial story on the first, and then there's 2 or 3 or sometimes even more stories above that of residential. So it's been I think an interesting development along the way, and it really underscores the need, I think, for light rail and better mass transit. And so I think but I like the development. They look great. I mean, I've been to the top floors of that. We did the tour of your building a couple of years ago, and the view from the top floor of Robb's building is nothing short of spectacular. spectacular. I mean, it's just great. You can see downtown from there. You can see over the court of the Minnetonka Golf Course. It's really great. So the next name is Carl Robertson, and Carl has been on our planning commission for not since 1950, but a long time, as a matter of fact. So and so Carl has been involved in a great many of the developments from the Planning Commission side. So he's the Planning Commission. Their work is extraordinarily detailed and very complex, and sometimes takes a long time. And I really want to thank Carl and the other members of the Planning Commission for their great work in looking over these developments to make sure that they fit within existing zoning, to make sure that they fit within the existing sort of character of the neighborhood in which they're coming. And so their work is really very complex. So, and then last but not least is Greg Hunt, who is with the City of St. Louis Park. Greg is our Economic Development Coordinator, and so many times, Greg, I assume you are probably the point person for a number of people that want to develop in St. Louis Park. So you might have a private developer that wants to move to St. Louis Park and is looking for a place to do that. They want to know, are there any buildings that you know of? The story I like to tell, Greg and I sat at a meeting, about 5-6 years ago, and somebody literally wanted to put a vineyard with grapes and a winery on the corner of Wooddale and Highway 7. And I was a little puzzled, but he was serious. I mean, he wanted to actually have a vineyard at the corner of Wooddale and Highway 7. And he was going to buy the buildings that were there that STEP was in for a little while, tear them down, turn it into a vineyard, and have grapes growing all along that corridor between, like where Wooddale is and Highway 100. Obviously, that development didn't go forward, but his comment sticks in my mind to this day, because I was meeting with him. I said, that's a pretty well-traveled road. There's a fair amount of car exhaust and everything else, and I got to tell you, the soils there, I don't know what's under that ground. Who knows what's there? It could be contaminated. His response to me is, good grapes, he said, need to suffer. And I thought, you'd make some pretty fine wine if that's the case there. So. Sorry. Well, thanks, Ted, for giving us that perspective on the history of St. Louis Park, and it really is the character of our community has changed obviously a lot in a relatively short period of time. And so, the title for today's session is "How Development Shapes Our City." So I guess I'm going to start with you, Greg, first. In your view, how are recent development projects that you know about shaping our city's future? Because there are a number of them. The Valley site, for example, is due to be under construction very soon. There's another one up at West at a major construction project slated for up near the West End where the Cavalia, that horse show was here several years ago. There's a big development there. There's some other development I know, slated for probably around where those light rail transit stations are. But, give us your shot of that, Greg, because you're probably in the front lines of that, I would suspect.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. We are indeed busy as far as our redevelopment goes. We have a number of projects that are in the offing. As the mayor mentioned, we're looking forward to the next phase up at the West End that would include 2 more apartment buildings, a hotel, and then 2 additional office buildings. Once those are completely constructed and the lease for the Olive Garden restaurant expires, then you'll see another apartment building up there. So you'll continue to see much more development up in the West End portion of town. As the mayor also mentioned, we're looking at development pressure around what will be the future light rail station, so at Beltline, Wooddale, and Louisiana. And we're literally meeting daily on development opportunities and planning around those station locations. And development is already occurring ahead of it. Robb's project, the Shoreham, just down the road from the Beltline station, is going to be kind of precedent setting for that portion of town along what's called CASA 25. From the Shoreham property at 25 in France all the way down to Beltline, we're anticipating future development there to occur. Mm-hmm. Likewise, in the Beltline area, that area is going to develop into a more eclectic mix of light industrial, light business park, if you will, and residential. And then you will see additional development at Wooddale, both north and south of the light rail station proposed at Wooddale and 36th Street. Further down at Louisiana and Oxford is where the last light rail station for St. Louis Park is. And you will see additional kind of light industrial, office showroom, office space occurring there as well. So that's a quick overview. of
Yeah,
a
but it's a
number of
lot more,
things
there's a
that
lot
are
going on. I will say this too, that, you know, West End opened, I mean, I think they actually broke ground about 3 days after the great crash of 2008, and I thought, oh, bad timing. But it was a strong enough development, and the location was good enough that it actually has done remarkably well, although the character of it has changed, because it was originally designed to be mostly a retail development, and it's really sort of morphed into more of an entertainment venue, I think, more than anything else.
Well, it helps to work with a national REIT who
It
has
does.
money.
Yes, it does. And so, yes, sir, question.
A two-part question for Greg. A, what is the betting line on whether the light rail will be built? And B, what is your best sense as to when the answer to that question will be known?
Yeah.
Sure. What is my estimate in terms, what is my expectation as to whether light rail will actually occur? And then secondly,
When will you know that?
when will we know that?
Yeah, one way or the other. If you.
Well, we're pretty bullish on the light rail coming. We're pretty confident. We're meeting regularly with the Metropolitan Council Project Office, and all indications are that the light rail should come to fruition. Now, that's not going to be without some political struggle. We've got to find some additional dollars from the state legislature. That's the last 10% of funding that needs to come from our state to help that project over the fiscal hump, so to speak. But we're fully anticipating and planning for light rail to occur. As to when it's likely to happen, you're actually looking at having the light rail be essentially approved by the end of next year. So 2016, so then you move into final engineering in 2017, and you start construction 2018 and 19, testing the line in 2019 and opening in 2020.
So next legislative session is the do or die as far as the legislature is concerned?
This legislative session coming
Coming
up.
up, yeah, the one in 2016, I think
Correct.
that'll be a, and I have to confess, Jake Spano actually should be here because he has been actually very closely aligned or closely following it. He's went on the CMC, the Corridor Management Committee, and been going to all those meetings and is still in touch with the county and the Met Council, and there's been obviously a change of leadership in the Met Council. I was frankly a little surprised that a few weeks ago Adam Dunnick, who was the chair of the Met Council, said that he was not going to float bonds for that. I'm not sure how they're going to pay for it, but they must have some way of doing it because, you know, I think Greg's right. I mean, we are still very bullish on it. Still expect that it's going to go forward. They've certainly engineered an awful lot of it. There have been, you know, obviously compromises made by the cities along the corridor, Minneapolis the whole way out to Eden Prairie. They've tried to, you know, find ways. There was initially a $347 million gap at one point. They made that up with some various concessions. I mean, Eden Prairie gave up the Mitchell Road Station, which was a large chunk of it, and there were other cities that have you know, sort of kicked in ways to meet that gap, so they did that. And I thought, well, if you could do that, you should be able to do it. So we're still looking forward to it. I have contended that the light rail transit line is, in my humble view, is the biggest deal that will happen in the next and the last 50 years in St. Louis Park. If it comes through here, it will keep us economically relevant for the remainder of the 21st century. One other question I've got for either Brad or for Rob.
I was just going to add before we moved on,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that the transportation bill is really going to be part of that. Depends if that funding is in
Right.
that. I've represented the city on the Business Advisory Committee, working with the light rail with the firm that's working on that, and that is really kind of the final piece. The business community, especially in the western suburbs, for the most part, not all of them, have been very supportive of the project, including the Twin West Chamber, which represents the western suburbs, has been supportive of this project, whether you like it or not, if you think the money really works or not. But just there hasn't been, you know, I tried to get over here today. Usually it takes me 3 to 4 minutes to get over here. It took me almost 40 minutes to get over from across the highway to here just because of all the construction. if you think we can keep getting people to the businesses and the people to where the jobs are just by building roads and bridges, it's going to be a little short-sighted. But so the business community has been supportive of it, but I think, as everybody has already alluded to, that really key piece of it is whether we're going to get that funding from the state. That's one of the smaller pieces, actually, of the whole budget. So.
But it's an important piece just the same. And so I'm going to change gears a little bit. One of the things that St. Louis Park has been, I think, very successful at, perhaps more successful than other communities, is forging private-public partnerships to do development. Robb was a party to that, and it's worked remarkably well. And so I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about that and how that's worked in St. Louis Park. And then, as a sort of an adjunct question to that, how much development is really driven exclusively by the private market? Because if you build it, they may or may not come. And so the private market's the one that I think really drives that. So Robb, can you kind of talk about that and how that was, you give us your experience with it? Because I think your project is very successful as a result of it.
In regards to the private-public partnership, the success is really, in my opinion, St. Louis Park has an incredible, to Greg's heart, an incredible staff. They really do to work with up front. A lot of these projects, St. Louis Park, as many of us know, has a lot of contaminated ground. For a developer, that is a huge undertaking, millions and millions of dollars. And these projects don't get built a lot of the time without a public-private partnership. Everything's very transparent. Everything's very up front. You kind of sift through it with the guys, the planning department and Greg and his team. And they just know, they know what to do. There's no disconnect there between the city council and the staff, which happens in other cities, actually, with developers quite frequently. And St. Louis Park really has a smooth way of communicating how this is going to work. And you as a developer, need to be extremely transparent as to what you need and why you need it. And usually there's a reason. Otherwise, if there's not, you're going to get booted out. But it's really been a successful process, mainly due to the city staff.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Well, and you alluded to something. I'm going to I'll kick this one in Carl's direction at this point. One of the things that St. Louis Park also has been, I think very famous for is a lot of public input on development. We see that all the time. Not just after the project is already drawn on paper, but well before it. I mean, I think about Excelsior and Grand, and Carl, you were around for that, that whole process, which was pretty remarkable, actually, in terms of, starting with kind of a blank sheet of paper. And so I want to get your take, and, for the audience here and the audience at home who might be listening, tell us a little bit about your perspective on how important public input is and how people can really make an impact on a development as a result of, that whole public process we have.
Well, you're right. It's huge. And most of my involvement in neighborhood meetings and things are as a planning commission representative, but I'm always amazed at how many people will come out on, cold winter nights to voice their opinion on how things, what their idea of how things should be. You always have a number of people that are just, kind of not in my backyard, stance, but for the most part, you get just very strong. We all learn something from the neighborhood, and and it does influence how we decide and what we decide. And so from early on, once again, we have great interactions at the public or at the planning commission meetings. But one of the first questions we always ask as we're hearing the, a potential development is, where was there a neighborhood meeting and what was said and who said what. And it's, they say people know in this city that if they voice their opinion, it will be heard. It's not just wasted breath. And we end up with better developments because of it. The developers are at those meetings, and sometimes you hear things that kind of makes them cringe, but they take it to heart, and there's always a win-win. That's what we're always looking for, is that win-win situation. Yes, sir.
Question?
How big a role, if any, has tax increment financing played in development?
Oh, huge. Yeah, I mean, it's. I'll touch on it, and then I'll throw it over to Greg. without tax increment financing, Excelsior Boulevard would not happen. I mean, it was done, you saw that development in 1994 there at what used to be the old Wilkins Pontiac area with they had the water tower, and it was Lilac Way. Tax increment financing factored into that. I don't think it would have happened except for that. And the same thing is true with Excelsior and Grand. Wouldn't have happened with that either. And the nice thing about it is, from the city's perspective, is that the city now has some skin in the game, and they can sort of not necessarily dictate, but they can help guide the project to what the public really wants. And so that's how Carl's talked about this public input process. To give you a quick perspective on how Excelsior and Grand happened, we knew that there was a problem on Excelsior Boulevard. I mean, you could tell 20 years ago that Excelsior Boulevard was I call it a corridor on the cusp. It was in bad shape. It was not very pedestrian friendly. Some of the businesses were in bad shape. There was at least one parking ramp there that I remember that had been condemned by the city inspector because they was afraid that if you put a truck on the top of it, it would pancake. I mean, it was the buildings were in rough shape. It was its time had long passed. Okay, the Excelsior Boulevard strip was in rough shape, and so there was one law office, for example, that had bars in the window, and I wanted to ask this guy, dude, what kind of law are you practicing here? I couldn't figure that out. So at least to that extent, the public had a sense that there was a problem. And so that's the first question I think government ever has to ask, and that is there a problem that you need to fix? Or is there some opportunity that would be irresponsible for you to let pass by? So we had the problem. The next question became, what do we do about it, And so as a part of the visioning process we did in 1995, that was one of the biggest issues that people around the city, not just those people living in like Minnetonka Vista or Minnetonka Oaks or in that general area we're talking about, but even people as far away as Fern Hill and Lake Forest are talking about, what are you going to do about Excelsior Boulevard? Because 25 years ago, a lot of the pundits out there, the urban planners and the folks that talked about urban development had written cities like St. Louis Park off. They said, you're doomed to urban decay. Business will move away, residents will move away, your schools will start to fall apart, and you're going to be blighted. There's just no doubt about that. Well, there were a number of people in the city, myself included, along with the development staff, that said, well, that ain't necessarily so. And so if you invest in something, you can make this work before it gets too far out of hand. But what we decided to do was to make sure that the people in this town whose money we were spending, because it was yours after all, $30 million of it, as I remember, on the tax increment financing for Excelsior and Grand, we asked them, what do you want? And I won't bore you with the whole long story, but a lot of times if in other communities, if people already see the picture on the wall, they're not idiots, okay? They know how much money it takes to draft that picture. There's a lot of money involved in that, because you've talked to engineers, you've talked to architects, you've talked to lawyers, financing people, and they think, uh-oh, the horse is already out of the barn. We started with Excelsior Boulevard with a blank sheet of paper and said, what do you want, what function would you like this downtown to serve? And there were quite literally 100 meetings, and I'm not exaggerating that, with that neighborhood and the business community around it to try to figure out what Excelsior Boulevard would look like in that area. And I will say that the public input process on that made it much more expensive. Not much more, but some more expensive. It made it much more time consuming. It was harder because as a public official, you let go of the result. You have to let go of that result so that it's not driven by some genius like me in City Hall. It's driven by the neighborhood and the people around it. But at the end of the day, I think it's a very successful development. It works great. And the very people that initially sort of opposed it are now walking across the street to have coffee at Starbucks. So that's what's been cool about it. So, yes, sir.
You talked about tax increment of financial. Can you?
Actually, the person that can probably do that better than I can is Greg. You're a little more. It's an investment today to get a return tomorrow. I mean, that's the thumbnail sketch, but Greg can give you more details on it than I probably can, because you deal with it every single day.
Correct. Thank you, Mayor. So you're using the taxes that are generated from new development to help pay for some extraordinary costs resulting from that development and putting it back into the project for a set period of time. Ultimately, when we provide the developer with a note to guarantee that amount of money, that income stream, that revenue stream, and then that note gets retired after a set period of time, and then the taxes fully come back on to the tax rolls. Now, the underlying property continues to be taxed at the same rate and the same level. So the basic land, the school district, the city, the county continue to collect the same taxes that they did before, but it's that period after the development has been built, and it's paying taxes to the city, the county, and the school district. Those taxes then get directed back to the developer, depending on how much taxes were agreed to be paid back to the developer.
Back to the developers.
Right.
Is it kind of a rebate?
In a sense, yes.
Essentially,
Right,
yeah.
right. So the developer has, so many millions of dollars worth of what we call extraordinary costs. These are costs that make the development extremely costly for you to build. And so we look at what those extraordinary expenses are, and we say, well, we think that you can bear some of those, but we will help you bear a certain amount in order for you to get a rate of return that allows you to have the project be financially feasible to allow it to move forward.
Maybe Rob can tie into it a little bit. I mean, you don't ask for tax increment financing on every project. From a developer's perspective, tell us what your perspective is.
No, you don't, and it's really on an as-needed basis, and like I said before, it's got to be extremely transparent, and the public weighs in on it. So if you really don't need it, and you're just asking for it, you're going to get booted out. It is for things like, contamination in the land, massive underground parking structure, because you don't want cars parked all over the place. Things like that really work for the city, the public improvements for the city ultimately, as well as the developer, and that's the public-private partnership that we were alluding to earlier. So it's really for costs like that.
Okay. Let me ask this to me. I'm not sure who best to direct this to, but St. Louis Park is uniquely located in the Twin Cities area. I mean, we have the advantage of a really good location. We have, for better or worse, we are surrounded by major highways, which can be a real problem. But it also gives you the ability, if you're doing a business that relies on trucking, for example, to get your product moved in and out. And yet, there are a lot of cities that are like that. There are lots of first-ring suburbs, and I don't know whether Greg, you might have a better sense of this than I do in terms of how well we're doing, but we didn't really see a huge slowdown of, it was some in the recession between 2008 and about 2013 or so, that 5-year period of time. But what do you attribute that to? I mean, we still saw people that wanted to come here and spend money and develop things, and sometimes it's hard. I mean, because Rob, you touched on it. I mean, this is it's harder, let's be honest. I mean, it's harder to develop in St. Louis Park than it is in a third or fourth ring suburb, because you got to knock stuff down, and then you got to put a mask on so you don't breathe up what's in it, and so anytime you dig a shovel up out of the ground in St. Louis Park, you got to be careful of touching the dirt, so you never know what's underneath it. But what do you attribute the fact that we really seem to be doing better than most other places?
St. Louis Park is fortunate and blessed to have a phenomenal location within the Twin Cities. And the reason why I say that is, we are immediately west of Minneapolis. We are surrounded by highways. So we've got highways to our north, to our south, to our east, and our west, and we've got a highway that goes directly through us. So we have phenomenal transportation access. And being that close to downtown provides just all kinds of opportunities for arts and entertainment, people being exposed to sporting events and that kind of stuff. It also allows folks to have that urban experience, but not necessarily having to live in an urban environment. They can be in a less than urban environment here.
I think there's one person in the audience that regards us as comfortably close, as I recall. So that's our yay. How about that? So yeah, so I know another hand up. Hey, Jerry.
I was wondering if we figured out a balance between light industrial and apartment buildings and the other kinds of different. Is there a balance? Are we keeping our light industrial?
Unfortunately, we're losing our industrial, and that's not surprising. If you look at over the last 20 years, we've lost over half of our acreage that was invested in industrial. In 1985, we had over 800 acres, and today we've got less than 400. But we're trying to hang on to those industrial areas where it makes sense, and pieces of industrial property that make sense. For instance, the former Novartis property, we really wanted to make sure that we held on to that as an industrial property, and we saw that property as an opportunity to repurpose that building by dividing it up and having it become a multi-tenant industrial building. And we were fortunate that we were able to work with a developer that was able to make that happen. So today, you're seeing multiple businesses in that building, and it's really turned that around. We've replaced the 300 jobs that we lost.
But are you holding it at 400? Is your goal to hold it 400 acres?
To the extent that we can. I mean, there are, development opportunities are kind of come up piecemeal, and so you have to deal with them as they come. But by and large, if you look at kind of our industrial areas, like the Beltline area and the areas around the hospital, we're trying to see what we can do to hang on to those, but change them a little bit in terms of creating greater density, more economic value, and greater jobs.
Hey, Carl, you had your hand.
Well, and kind of to follow up with your question before, Mayor, I think a lot of what makes development work well here is, once again, to give kudos to the planning department and the planning staff, is our comp plan, it's a lot of forward thinking in there. We have really looked at what do we want it to be. The city doesn't just sit back and wait for a developer to come along and propose something. When developers come here, they know that we've got a strong comp plan and that we're going to stick to it. And if they ask to change a light industrial site to residential, the answer is probably going to be no. And when we are, and as I'm on the planning commission, when someone comes forward with a project and they're looking to change the zoning, change the comp plan, I don't really care about their project. I need to look at the bigger picture. And so on something like that, does it make sense to change that light industrial to residential? Does it stand on its own two legs? And usually the answer is no. Even if you really like the development, if it's a great developer and they've done something very exciting, if it just doesn't quite fit, it's like there's other sites for them to do that. And so I think part of why we can continue to develop is that we have looked and we have created opportunities, and there are areas that we've identified that are ripe for development. And as the LRT is coming through, we looked at that whole corridor and we tweaked the comp plan, and we've done some, we developed the business park zoning in anticipation that we want something to happen, but we're not reacting to it. We're trying to be proactive and make sure that we're opening the door and we're guiding development to happen the way we want it to happen.
Do you anticipate that light industry will get get more of that as light rail transit comes through town? Because it's going to go somewhere. It's going to go kind of near where they.
I think so. I mean, the whole business park, it's a mix in there. So we're trying to get some residential. We're trying to get some retail, just to make it more vibrant. But we're still holding on to kind of the core of that, and the way that it is written, it's. I think there's multi-stories of that sort of clean industrial work.
Brad, you had a question.
Oh, I was just going to say that
in
in my 30-plus years or whatever, I have seen a change in the mix from more, and you guys probably know the numbers more closely than I do, but from the light industrial or the larger industrial to more retail and residential.
Right.
And a lot of these projects, you can see Honeywell left. We got a big, kind of a big box retail area. So we see a lot of that. And then you alluded to the recession, that we still saw development through that time, but that doesn't mean that our businesses didn't have, especially the kind of the small independent.
The mom and pop places kind of.
Mom and pop kind of businesses, kind of our bread and butter, certainly did suffer through that kind of recessionary period. And we did see changeover. We did see businesses closing and changing and come and go. So there has been economic influences, but also influences, and whether that's roads or whatever it may be, we have seen some of our industrial kind of move away from this area and get more into a retail, residential.
Well, I can tell you personally, I'm an industrial guy. I like industrial jobs.
Yeah, well, it makes
I think
jobs,
it
yeah.
helps to diversify the economic base of the community. I like for communities to make stuff. You know, it creates good jobs.
Make a lot of bun pans in this town, as I recall.
Yeah, we
So-
do too. We like working with industrial widget makers is really kind of one of our niches. So yeah.
We have a strategy that's welcoming it to the
I would like to think that the city's welcoming to it. The challenge is that the majority of our industrial stock was built in 1962.
Yeah.
So though these buildings are obsolete. We've got, they're small, they've got low ceiling heights,
Right.
and they just don't meet today's standards for, industrial purposes. Now, they're great for small businesses, and they're great incubators for small business, which is great. And so that's why you'll see a lot of that space getting filled up. And we encourage, small businesses to utilize those, and we're always trying to help small businesses locate in available spaces here in town. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, our industrial stock, just the buildings themselves are obsolete.
And some of them don't. One of the things we've been also trying to do, Clint Pyers from the city is our information technology guy, and slowly but surely we're trying to bring ourselves into a wired city, so that you get fiber optic cable to the businesses, because they absolutely have to have it. I mean, if you have an industrial building that was state of the art in 1962, it's not state of the art anymore, and you can't compete. I mean, so you have to. I think the city can help facilitate that by making sure that when people come here, that there's a business or some building here that works for them. Because
Is there an opportunity like Excelsior and Graham in the light industrial?
I suppose there could be, yeah.
Think about building modern buildings that would work.
We may get some pressure for that as light rail comes through it, especially at Beltline and Louisiana. I think that you might see some of that, because that's a sort of an industrial area anyway. And that kind of, my sense, this is just me, I mean, I'm not speaking from my own perspective now, is that as that kind of, when the light rail transit comes here, there will be a push, I think, to develop around the stations, because that's where they want to be. They want to be around the hubs. And you can walk to work, you can get your workers here, they don't have to drive, they can get here in any kind of weather pretty much. They're here on time, which is a big deal for a lot of places. And so there will be a pressure to modernize the buildings. I mean, I think they will, and because you're right, some of these buildings are very old. So you got a question, I think, somebody at the front here. Yeah, I don't want to ignore you.
One of the great development failures in the past decades was in the city of Minneapolis with Lake and Nicollet.
Oh, yeah.
When the city ended up, for whatever reason, owning that parcel,
Mhm.
and then had to beg Kmart
Mhm.
to take it over and close Nicollet Avenue, and now the city's going to bail out from that.
Mhm.
Have you avoided that in St. Louis, or things like that?
So far, yes. We got our money out of the Wi-Fi deal, and that was as close as we got to that kind of, and we did. We actually made almost $500,000 on that. Now, that, frankly, is not the way I want to fill my city's coffers, to be honest with you. But we've pretty much avoided that. We've been very fortunate with developments. They've been very successful. We've gotten our money back out of the tax increment financing whenever we have, given that kind of investment. And I will absolutely credit our city staff for that, because they vet that out very thoroughly. And we've been very fortunate. Yeah, Kurt, what are you going to say?
I guess this question's probably for Rob to start with, and not necessarily directed to you, but why are developers across the metro building almost exclusively luxury apartments as opposed to condos?
Good question.
Happy to address that. Well, number one, there's currently a legislation out there that allows people there's a 10-year construction warranty, and you've got a slew of attorneys out there that have bound together and are going after associations of these condo projects at the 9th year, 9.5 years in, and that construction defect language is not very specific. So they're just rounding it up and suing all the developers of all the condo projects. And to be honest, that's a main deterrent, certainly for our group, and I know a ton of other condo developers. There's only one. I mean, there's a residential boom right now in multifamily.
Yeah.
You only see 1 or 2 condo projects that are being built right now. That'll tell you that there's something else going on, and that's in my opinion a big part of it. Number 2, there's really a change in the demographic in terms of renting your place and owning your life. The people are, the young people, they move around for jobs a lot. The baby boomers are looking to rent more now. It's cyclical, but these are major demographic shifts. So, I could go on forever, but those are two main reasons why rentals have seen more of a boom than condos.
Actually, that was my next topic, actually. It was a perfect segue to talk about how, demographic trends have, obviously impact development. Now, it was interesting. All the demographic statistics I've seen in the last maybe 10 years or so indicated that St. Louis Park is, like a lot of first-ring suburbs, kind of an aging population. Those baby boomers that were born, between my father contends that the baby boom started 9 months and 1 hour after the first troop ship got to New York, and so from the Second World War. And so, but like 1946 up until about 1965, those people are all getting in their 60s and even close to their 70s at this point. So it's an aging population, and yet, Kurt and Cindy and Jerry and I were at this neighborhood party last week at the Browndale Park, and I'm telling you, it was a wash in little kids. I mean, Joe, you could probably talk about we have one of the largest kindergarten classes in St. Louis Park we've had in like 30 years. I mean, it's over 400 kids. And I mean, our graduating classes at the high school now are what, Joe, like 310 kids, something like that? 300?
Closer to 300, and the kindergarten first and second grade are closer to 400.
Yeah, I mean, Robb Metz Rob's our school superintendent, who indicated that there is no open enrollment anymore at those lower grades because we're seeing such an influx of new families, and it's not really a second baby boom, obviously, but I mean, there were a ton of little kids at that park in our neighborhood, and 10 years ago, you would have seen a third of that. So is that affecting demographic or affecting development patterns anybody can tie into that one. I mean, yeah, take a shot at it.
Well, I think it has a lot. I mean, the single-family housing market in St. Louis Park is not dead by any means.
No, not at
It
all.
is hugely successful. Minnetonka Vista and Oaks, I mean, these are insanely popular neighborhoods. I'm in my late 30s, and I have a ton of friends with young kids, and they're after those neighborhoods because of the urbanization, number one. Number two, from a rental standpoint, it's not just you have a kid and you go buy a house anymore. Not necessarily.
Oops, you lost your mic there, Rob.
What?
You
Oh,
lost
sorry.
your mic. There we
Oops,
go.
sorry.
All right.
There is what we now know from a popular TV show is the modern family. It's really more so.
That is
it's
very true.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, 2 parents and 3 kids. It's a dad who's got their kids half the time. They're going to want a 2-bedroom apartment or a one plus. It's different, many different family, familial situations that are now present in our community, and the communities that are accepting that are very, in my opinion, forward-thinking, like St. Louis Park has been. And that's why you see all these parks and schools that are popping up. I mean, they've got great family stuff, and that helps attract families to our rental buildings and the single-family housing. Anyway, that's an initial crack.
Carl, what do you
Yeah,
think?
well, and along those
and then
lines-
We'll go to Brad then next.
Just the, how people move around and just the whole idea of walkable cities and the younger generation, they want that. They don't want to necessarily get into their cars to go get everything. They want to walk, they want to bike, they want to take transportation and LRT. And that, that's going to give you bigger concentrations along those nodes. And it just, it gives you much more flexibility, or drives much more flexibility in our housing types. And that's something that, from the very first housing summit that I participated in here is, St. Louis Park is once again that forward-looking, wanting to make sure that we have a variety of housing types so we meet everybody's needs. So we have a nice diverse population, and that takes planning. That's looking out 20 years, and it's paying off.
Yeah, Brad, what are you going to say?
Well, we end up financing a lot of those,
Right, I was gonna
thankfully,
say that,
that
yeah. How's
we have
financing
an
changed over the course of
older
time?
population, and that's changing over, and the young demographic, the millennials,
Yeah.
love this area. It's 2 things. It's location and schools.
Yeah.
They talk to us about that all the time. They're coming to St. Louis Park because of the reputation of the schools, and they love the housing product. They like the small, the smaller homes. They don't, that age, and they have some, character to them.
Right.
They like the area, the closeness, the walkability, those things. But what always comes up is the quality of the schools in this area. So
We're very fortunate in that regard. So, Matthew, you had a question, and then we'll go to this gentleman back here.
Segue perfectly. As we saw it brought up, St. Louis Park is bisected by highways and mountains.
Oh, yeah, that's been the case for years.
Early neighborhoods were essentially walkable neighborhoods. They had their own grocery stores and everything else.
Right.
Are we moving back to that? Are we moving back to walkable neighborhoods where you'll be able to get off a light rail train, buy your groceries on your way to your townhouse?
Right. Well, like Paris, they don't have groceries. They don't have cup foods in downtown Paris. So, that's a good question. What do you think?
To a degree. There's still, we have neighborhoods, like my neighborhood, I'm up in the Westwood Hills area, where there isn't anything walkable close. And it would be great, when I'm in places in South Minneapolis and you're in neighborhoods where there's the little, 4 stores on the corners.
Right.
We would love to have them, except anybody who opened those, they would go bankrupt because they are competing with the big box. And as much as people want to patronize them, if you can't walk to them, then if you try and drive to them, there's no place to park, or to be blunt, neighbors will get upset because you've got people parking in your neighborhood, going down the streets. And we're all very touchy about, outsiders parking on our streets. And yet, so it kind of defeats itself. We can't have some of that. But the drive for that makes projects like Robb's and those kinds of the larger developments that kind of have all those services in a walkable area. The desire for it's huge, and so we're going to get it to a degree. And once again, we're going to have a little bit of both. We're going to have areas where people can get off the LRT and
Just walk home.
and walk home and pick up their groceries.
Just a minute, question back to the red shirt. Yes, sir.
My question is twofold. The Linden Hills Edina teardown phenomenon
Oh, yeah.
is nipping at the heels of my neighborhood
Yeah.
over here.
We're seeing it all the time. People tearing the roof off, putting a second story on. We have a lot of that.
Big houses on small lots
Yeah.
and teardowns. Now, that's okay, but the trouble is, I don't live near a big Excelsior and Grand that you can have a lot of stores to walk to. I'm near a little Dakota Avenue and Minnetonka
Sure.
Boulevard.
Yeah, just where you are.
But there's an empty filling station
Right in
that's
the
been
corner,
sitting
yeah.
there empty and
Sure.
abandoned and unsightly for almost a decade.
Yeah, it's been there for a long
And
time.
then you go up to Texataka, and every corner, it's almost all empty buildings.
Yeah.
Now,
That's it.
what can they do to liven up and bring business? Do they
There's
have
a-
to tear those old things down and put new MIC stores?
Something, yeah. I mean, Greg can probably take a shot. I will tell you,
People like the easy commutes.
Yeah,
That's why
that's-
they're building McMansions.
that has been a sore spot, I know, for the city council for some time, in that about 5 years ago, the state law changed, and we can no longer use eminent domain to do private development. It has to be blighted, and there's a very
It looks like
strict.
Death Valley.
Well, a little bit, and you don't want it to ever get to the point where it's blighted, because once it becomes really truly blighted, it spreads like a cancer to the rest of the neighborhood. I don't want it to get to that point, and I was very disappointed that the legislature bought into that, and because it makes it very difficult to do that. We've been working with the landlord that owns Texadonka Shopping Center for years. His response is, I got no problem. My place is full. I'm making money on the rent, and and we can't really force him to.
There's empty stores.
Yeah, and he owns a lot of that. Maybe Greg, you can tie that, because I would love to redevelop that part of town, just to infuse some energy into that part of town. It's something we've been talking about for literally years, and we keep getting kind of roadblocked by the guy that owns it. So maybe
So
Greg, you can talk.
outdated,
It is, yeah, I know, and I don't like to see boarded up buildings in town, because it sends the wrong message to everybody. Anybody that drives through it, anybody that's a realtor is going to take somebody down to go, look at these lovely houses, and all they see is the empty gas station. That's what they see.
That's what they call an attractive nuisance.
It-
And that's vandalism.
Well, yeah, and you get
graffiti,
and everything else.
you
Yeah,
know, all
it's
the
just.
bad elements
it's just a
Before you
bad,
know it, you're looking like North Minneapolis.
yeah, and you don't want to do that. So Greg, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about,
Well, the good news is that the filling station will no longer be vacant. It's coming back.
That's good.
And there will be a new franchise in there this year, or beginning of next year. So they will be reopening. As the mayor alluded to, though, it does take a property owner to work with us, to create something. And there are there are some property owners that are just more active than others. And unfortunately,
he's one of them.
he's one of them.
You might have issues too with individual owners or whatever, but if you want neighborhood businesses, if you want places to walk to, you have to go to them. You have to patronize them.
Right.
I think Carl alluded to the big box. We don't have a Four Firkes anymore because they go get it 10 cents cheaper at one of the big box places.
Well,
So
it's a
if you don't want those places in your neighborhood, don't go to them. But if you want them, like if this gas station comes back,
Yeah,
you have
then
to
that's where you should buy your
patronize the
gas,
small
yeah.
business owners and your local business owners. Otherwise, you don't have them.
Yeah, they will go out of business. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's true, and that's what was so important. I knew that Excelsior and Grand, because we got a lot of pushback on Excelsior and Grand from neighbors about talking about traffic and noise and density and lighting, and they were expecting what was going to happen when we built Excelsior and Grand was what used to happen in the 1970s when those bars would close at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there'd be this whole glut of people would spill out in the neighborhood doing all kinds of nefarious stuff. And so I was very encouraged when I saw that exact phenomenon, Brad, where people were walking across the street. They'd walk 2 or 3 blocks to go and have dinner at McCoy's or the Panera that was there for a while, or the new Blackstone, that's called Blackstone Grill, I think now. But they're walking across and patronizing those businesses, because that's, if you don't patronize them, they don't last long. So, yes, sir.
If you could come back here, you said we lost Firkes now.
Four Firkes. The Four Firkes, it was a specialty beer store on 36th, and his name was Jason Alvey that owned it, and he was like a PhD in beer. I mean, this guy knew more about beer than anybody I've ever known, and he had all sorts of specialty product in there. So if you wanted a beer from Belgium, you could get one. You wanted a beer from Indonesia, you could get one. I mean, he did not sell the kind of stuff you'd buy at one of the big box liquor places, but it was a very special, and he had beers, and he would give you samples and say, do you want a beer that has a slight blueberry taste to it, for example, and he would get you one. I mean, and unfortunately, because people just didn't patronize it as much, because Brad's right, you could get it, you could go buy a case of something else at a larger big box retail place, and so they weren't going to buy the specialty stuff. So, yes, sir.
Does the term pocket neighborhood ever come up in your meetings?
Pocket neighborhood? Not really. We don't really talk about that much.
Some, but not really. I mean, I'm familiar with the term, but we don't really get it. They don't discuss it around St. Louis Park. We just don't have kind of that opportunity.
We got time for maybe one more question. Yes, sir.
I want to give an alternative. I think the biggest development in St. Louis Park is going to be along the 394 corridor, where Minneapolis moves out of Minneapolis and moves down.
West End
Corporations
is.
will start building along that corridor. And the light rail is a loser because electric cars have been taking over there. So, where you get the light rail built, we will perfected the electric car, and it's going to be small and with inefficient and not very costly. That'll really build up 394. People from the west, farther west, do not like going all the way downtown any longer.
Well, you have to pay a lot of parking.
Your development is working because the young people don't want to go downtown anymore to have fun because it's too chaotic down there.
Yeah.
And you're running a place that is full of life and fun, but not chaotic or dangerous. So
Yeah.
this is one of the reasons your development's working so well.
Yeah, and West End, it was interesting, along Excelsior Boulevard, what really sort of primed that pump was the Park Commons, where the Man Theater is, and that was done in like 1994, and it has had, I think, an impact the whole way down to France Avenue. I mean, because there's energy there, there's life there. West End, I think we have the same kind of thing. The car I'm looking for, by the way, is, I like the electric car. What I want is the car where I can get into it, plug in where I want to go, and go in the back seat and sleep. That's what I'm looking for. There you go. Oh, it's coming. It's already here. I mean, it's coming. They've been driving a Google car around San Francisco for a couple of years. One last question. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the amenities that young families want, and also how older people don't want to have to go too far, don't want to go downtown. We're on the best of that. we have a concert hall in St. Louis Park and a good museum in St. Louis Park? Not really. And this Reformation site that now is kind of in the offing, that would be a perfect venue to have, it's like state-of-the-art concert venue in what was the main sanctuary, and then those arched, and that is used by Friends of the Arts and the Russian Museum, and it's a wonderful exhibit space, so I hope that consideration will be given to preserving that mid-century architecture that's, wonderful.
Cool. Well, again, I think we're about out of time, so I want to thank Ted for organizing this. This is great. I thank my panelists, Brad Bakken and Robb Bader, Carl Robertson, and our very own Greg Hunt. So thanks again for organizing. Anything else you wanted to do to close up here? Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you. It was good questions, good comments. Loved it. All right.